Hi, my name is Sean Cork, and I'm the curator of prints and photographs here at the Museum of the City of New York, curator for the exhibition of the current New York New Music 1980 to 1986 in New York City. And I am here with Mark Goodman, one of the original VJs at MTV from 81 to 86. And hope we're going to be asking him a few questions about his time and experiences. First, how did you come to work for MTV? And what was it like to be one of the initial VJs on the air?
The way that I wound up at MTV is kind of a long and winding road. I was in radio. I had been in radio for when MTV started. I had been in radio for 6 years or so before that. I had moved. I was in Philadelphia in radio. As it happens, in 1979, when I was still working in Philadelphia, um, I was going to host an hour-long video program on a UHF station in Philadelphia. Remember UHF?
Yeah.
And I was supposed to do that, and then the station made me music director, so I didn't. I wound up not doing that. But a friend of mine who the station had been working with, who worked in television in Philadelphia, um, reached out to me because he was involved with this company, Warner Amex, two corporate massive giants, but they were doing this thing, this sort of 24-hour video music channel. By this time, I was already in New York. I left Philadelphia in July of 80 to go to work at WPLJ, the #1 rock station in New York. I was so bored there. I was really I love rock and roll. I love, Meatloaf and Bad Company and Led Zeppelin and all that, just fine. But damn, there was other things going on in music, and I wanted to be playing that, and we weren't. And this thing, MTV, came along at just the right time. And I thought, well, that seems like a cool idea. It'll probably be around. I'll quit my job at the #1 rock station in the #1 market in the country to go and do that. That's what I did.
uh, what would you say? I'm going to improvise a little here. What would you say was the difference between being an radio on air personality with being an on television personality?
The main difference
Yeah.
is the medium itself. And by that, I mean, I don't mean to be idiotic about it. The medium, what I mean is when you're in radio, I was taught to, you relate to the microphone and you talk to one person. When you're in radio, you can do that and you can be looking all around the room and picking your nose and yawning. You could be doing anything. That does not work on television. I found you have to really engage. You have to learn. I had to learn to relate instead of a microphone. I had to learn to relate to a camera and look directly into that camera and know that there's someone on the other side. That was the exercise.
Cool. What was the experience like? I mean, in terms of like flow and because I think of like radio as being on air and like almost live or
Oh, it
usually
is live.
and whereas I imagine on MTV it's taped and um, I just imagine there's kind of a different flow and a different way of working.
Yeah. Well, not only the flow of MTV was uh, just the in studio segments for us, for the five VJs. We didn't see the videos, we didn't hear the videos. And in the earliest days, we'd be adding music. The people in the office, the executives in the office would add music, and it would just show up on our log, and we'd be like, wow, here's a new Pat Benatar video. I haven't really seen that one yet. So that was an issue, and maybe not even know the song, depending. So that was a really big thing that we had to kind of deal with as talent in that situation. We had to come out of a video into our segment as though we had just watched the video with the audience.
Mhm.
So that was a little bit of, a little bit of thespian action.
Sure.
That
Uh,
was a learning curve.
and then besides introducing videos, you often had on-air guests, artists, and you did a lot of interviews. I'm wondering if you want to tell us a little bit about that, and maybe who were some of your favorite people to interview.
We did interviews a couple of different ways. Sometimes we had people just sort of, show up to do an hour of a shift, so they would be with us. We did 4 breaks an hour, so they would be with us for those 4 breaks. Sometimes we did it that way. Other times we stopped down recording VJ segments and actually sat and did a full-on interview with an artist,
Mhm.
and that could be used, edited into shows in the future or into our music news, which we did in the early days. We did twice an hour, so it could be used that way or used in a special program. And people in the early days, we had like Robert Plant was in for when the Honey Drippers record came out, and JJ, because JJ was great friends with Robert Plant, having been the first DJ in America to play Led Zeppelin on the radio in Boston. He was buddies with Robert, so he got the first interview with him. I wound up getting the second one, but I remember him telling us about this crazy American band that him and some of his other friends had seen in this club. This American band called the Stray Cats. Oh man, wait until you hear these guys.
Hmm.
He turned us on to the Stray Cats. So
Mhm.
that was amazing. Other interviews, well, I mean, for me, just generally, these were not in studio. They flew me to London to interview Paul McCartney in studio while he was working on the soundtrack to Give My Regards to Broad Street.
Amazing.
Admittedly, not a great film, but that film did include Paul's reworking of some Beatles songs, which was pretty incredible. So they flew me over there to interview him in advance of that release and in studio at Air Studios. And he was there recording, he was doing things for the soundtrack. So I was there. They flew me to London to talk to Paul McCartney for 15 minutes. At 15 minutes, if I'm looking straight out at Paul, behind Paul is his publicist running back and forth and giving me the cut signal. And I just looked at Paul and said, I'm sorry, Paul, they're asking me to stop here. Should we stop? And he leans in and he goes, let's not. And that just made my year. We talked for another 45 minutes. And as if that wasn't enough, after the interview was done, we went into the studio where he was working on a piece from one of the Beatles songs that was included on the soundtrack. So I'm sitting at the board, at the soundboard in the control room. To my right is George Martin. In the studio is Paul McCartney with the violin bass.
Incredible.
My 9-year-old self was freaking out.
Mm.
A moment that I will never forget. And on top of that, I'll just one cherry and then we could move on.
Mm.
Paul asked if I had ever been to London before, which I had not. And he started recommending places for me to go to have dinner after this. And he picks up this one place and he goes, "Oh no, that's really expensive." And I'm thinking, McCartney thinks this is expensive. I don't want to go there. But he actually was another place, and it may have been Stringfellows, but he literally called them and said, "My friend Mark is coming down tonight for dinner with his wife. Can you just make sure that he's treated okay?" Paul McCartney made a dinner reservation for me. I will never forget it. I'm done.
Just insane. Yeah. So you interviewed a lot of people. I'm curious what the, you know, having all that practice, what that kind of did for you professionally, and what you gained as a professional interviewer from those years. This is from.
Practice makes perfect. it was part of what helped at MTV for me doing interviews was the fact, after certainly after even just a year, people walked into the studio to be interviewed knowing me,
Mm,
knowing MTV, knowing what MTV had done for their career. So they were ready to bring their A game. They were ready to give me a great interview.
mhm,
And that is half the battle. To have people realize, we're on this nationwide channel. Everybody is watching it. I want to get the word out, and I don't want to come off as an asshole.
Well, speaking of interviews and on-air moments, I mean, you were there through some really incredible times, and I'm wondering if there are other on-air moments that that kind of stick with you. One in particular I'd like to ask you about is
Sure.
um, the first MTV Music Awards and your experience there. But if there are any
Hmm.
others, of course, we would love to hear about them.
Well, I could certainly talk about the first VMAs. That was, for the five of us, a bit of a shock, to be honest, because that was really the first time that MTV reached out to stars, in that case, Bette Midler and Dan Aykroyd, to host. We, the five of us, always hosted MTV events.
Mm,
And for the five of us, we were kind of relegated to, the second row, if you will.
mhm,
I had a little bit to do. I had a couple of people to interview in the audience. I think, I'm trying to remember, I think I might have interviewed Amy Mann that night. But I just did a couple of brief segments. Martha, I know, was backstage, and I think that she walked out on stage. She may have been on before Madonna. I can't remember exactly what everyone did,
mhm.
but we weren't the focal point. And that was tough for all of us to swallow. That's what the VMA experience was about. And that was a harbinger of things to come.
Interesting, and I mean, so that colored your experience of that event,
Of
given
the event. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because I mean, what happened at the actual event was pretty remarkable, but I could totally see from a professional standpoint it not being so fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. Madonna rolling around uh, claiming later that she was looking for her shoe. Her shoe came off. She was like rolling around. I don't believe that for a minute. But yeah, Madonna rolling around on the floor and doing that thing for like a virgin was pretty ridiculous, pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, why don't we talk about some of your like happy on-air memories or things that events that you maybe hosted that you have,
Mhm.
particularly good memories of.
Well, I can say that the thing about the VMAs was that it was live. And
Mhm.
MTV, as I said, MTV was not live. Our studio segments were recorded at least 24, oftentimes 48 hours in advance. So that was a big thing to be live. The first VMAs, which was what, 84? You may know better than me. I can't remember.
Yeah, yeah,
But we before that, on the first New Year's Eve, so this is December 31st, 1981,
yeah.
we hosted the MTV New Year's Eve Rock and Roll Ball, the first annual, where we were live and we celebrated New Year's in all of the time zones. We had David Johansen, we had Bow Wow Wow. It was an incredible night, and it was live. And it turned out that first one turned out to be an insane night for everyone. Who knew? We didn't realize. I mean, we were what, 6 months old, 5 months old. Everybody in New York, artists and fans alike, wanted to be in that room. So there was a line around the block. It was pouring rain outside. The fire department showed up because we were filling beyond capacity. And the five of us anchored that. And that was a blast for all of us. And we continue to anchor all of the New Year's Eve rock and roll balls. And those were always great because not only were the bands playing live incredible, Billy Idol played, Duran Duran played over the years. We had the biggest artists playing, but the people who showed up, the guests, the Beastie Boys were guests. They didn't play, they were guests. And they were hanging out with, Ian McCulloch. It was incredible. The people that just showed up to party.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Um, Switch gears a little bit to like just be thinking, looking back and thinking about the time. Um, why do you think that so many people are so fascinated with music in the 80s and MTV still to this day? I mean, MTV is still here, but it's obviously a very different thing. What is it about that time that has kind of continued to capture the popular imagination?
It was what the social media of the day, I guess, or it was a brand new idea. It was creating its own universe of music. Music on television before that had been relegated to, oftentimes, unless we're talking about Bandstand or something, was relegated to late night, 11, 12 o'clock, Midnight Special and shows like that, Hullabaloo and Shindig, even back in the early days, where they were later on, but the real music shows happened late. So MTV created this whole universe that made listening to music kind of a lifestyle, and that just isn't the same anymore. And MTV made the decision early on, while I was still there, in fact, to not grow old with their audience. They continued to try and program to that basically, 12 to 24-year-old audience. They certainly have gone beyond that and would go, 12 to 35, they would say. And that's about right. But it's a lifestyle channel now. It's not really about music. And that's why music television is no longer in the logo.
Yeah. You've obviously, since you've left, gone on and done some great things as well. And
Hope so.
I'm wondering, I'm wondering, like, how do you think that experience has kind of helped your career, or just informed what you do, even to
Well,
today?
I mean, that's um, how can I answer? What is MTV? MTV changed my life. MTV made me professionally make a left turn that I never expected. My career path was radio. I knew when I was 10 years old that I wanted to be in radio, and I was in radio. And my path was, I'm going to be in radio. I'm going to get to be a music director. Then maybe I'll be a program director and I'll consult or whatever it was. That was my path. Then this thing came along, television. I was not prepared for that. I wasn't headed towards that, but it was the being a national phenomenon, a worldwide phenomenon. I've been saying it for years. It was the center of the universe. Being there was unlike anything else I experienced in my career before or since. And it was it's the gift that keeps on giving. you know, because I'm Mark Goodman from MTV, I get to do a lot of stuff. So it's pretty great.
I wanted to ask you, because you did see the show. I was wondering if you would say something about it. I'm wondering if there was something that you saw that surprised you, or something that were made you smile, or you had a positive reaction to.
What I remember about the show
Mhm.
was really like every sort of step that I took. Some of these old photos from those days in New York City were such amazing flashbacks, were so wonderful to see that it was a blast. It really, in the most visceral kind of way, took me back to those days. I had me thinking about, the clubs I used to go to, the Pep, and well, Nell's even was a place like there was DJs who were at Nell's who came out, and we wound up playing years later on MTV, and it was the exhibit did a beautiful job of encapsulating. You actually went further musically than MTV really did. I mean, you went deeper. Some of the musical references that you make, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, they know what they're talking about around here. Okay, it was a blast. And by the way, I was there with somebody who I worked with at MTV, if I recall.
Yeah, yeah. Susan, right? Susan Sternberg.
Sue Steinberg uh, was there with me, and Sue Steinberg is the woman who changed my life. She hired me to be a VJ at MTV,
Yeah.
and I credit her with everything that has happened to me since 1981. The early days of MTV, and when I say early, I mean the days before August 1st, 1981, the lead up to our launch. Um, it was kind of crazy. I mean, from top to bottom, from us in the studio to the executives, we didn't know what we were doing. I can't underscore that enough. We were like, I don't know, let's do this. We think that this will work. In terms of what the five of us had to deal with, we were trying to figure out every day in rehearsals before the launch, what is a VJ? What do we do? How do we act? And that continued after the launch. But so there was a couple of months of rehearsals, and we had the hiring kind of sort of dribbled in over the course of that time. Alan and Martha both were late hires. We were, you know, days away from launch when Alan was hired, and same for Martha. And it was almost an accident. So, and they were not really, they weren't in radio, they weren't music people. So their job was even harder because they had to literally figure out who they were on the air. I already had that sense. JJ and I both had that sense because we had already been on radio and we kind of knew what that sort of position was like. Um, so there was a lot of rehearsal, a lot of trying different things, a lot of fooling around with stuff on the set. And then finally it came to the day that we would record the launch. Okay. So the launch was recorded 2 days before it aired. And that was really weird. It was me. It was my show that kicked off MTV at midnight on August 1st. And the plan was my intro. Hey, welcome. You'll never look at music the same way again. That was our line at the time, and explaining what was about to happen. And I'm going to introduce you to my fellow VJs, and that didn't really work out. What wound up happening was the Rocket, John Lack going, ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll. John Lack was the CEO. And then the Buggles, and then Pat Benatar, and then me, supposedly. It was Alan Hunter going, and I'm Alan Hunter. It was all of the pieces. Each VJ had a different piece that was supposed to go back to back to back. The guy at the uplink where the stuff went up to the satellite screwed it up because commitment. I mean, the equipment was not ready for us and what we needed. Wow. So the first day, and especially the launch that night, was madness. The five of us and the 40 or so people who worked at MTV at that time were in the basement of a restaurant in Fort Lee, New Jersey, because MTV was not on in Manhattan and would not be for another year. So that's where we had to go to watch the launch. And there was like blue hairs upstairs having dinner, and we're all downstairs in the basement, blasting rock and roll.
Those in the first, I think, 20 minutes or so playing in the gallery here behind us, actually. Yeah.
It was craziness. I think, as I understand it, the Museum of Broadcasting has straightened that out. So, in fact, I am the first person on the air.
and in fact, what we have is the original uncorrected
screw ups and all.
Yeah.
Oh, great. That's worth checking out.
You were actually there to see the rise of a number of musicians almost solely based on the fact of their getting airplay on MTV. I mean, would you like to kind of talk? You can name specific names if you want, but I'd love to hear about that experience of like MTV, you being a part of this organization that launched careers, and how you saw that from the inside.
Um, MTV's commitment to artists, specific artists, is pretty well known. One of the big examples early on was In Excess, because In Excess was this obscure Australian band, and the programmers at MTV literally made the commitment: we are going to break this band in the United States. That was the commitment, and we did. I mean, it took the band, several albums to kind of get up to speed, but we were all over it. We were there with the videos. Um, Duran Duran, I mean, I would like to say that it was MTV who broke them. And yes, we did, but only by virtue of playing those videos. They caught on their own. And were, Duran Duran was a band. Their first album came out when I was still in radio. I didn't play it on the radio. But video was a whole new entree to that band and to so many others. And to see a band like Duran Duran, who really was, part of that fluffy shirt movement, the new romantic movement, to see those guys blossom the way that they did, to see how they evolved from the sort of, that kind of new wavy synth thing that they were initially, to working with Nile Rodgers, and really adding big drums and getting beats and dance rhythms in there. That evolution that we chronicled on MTV it was great to see. It was also, for me, one of the fascinating things sort of alongside that was to see people like Ray Davies from the Kinks. Most legacy bands had kind of a hard time with video. They didn't, REO Speedwagon notoriously hated doing video and would just mostly do live video. Journey as well, mostly just live performance video shot and edited. So to see someone like Ray Davies, who is such a showman, blossom and really, embrace that format, the video format, was really great. Peter Gabriel, same thing. A guy who was an incredible talent, musically made huge advances, but the way that he embraced the art of video was really something. And we were honored to be the gallery for work like that.
Yeah. We had in the on our console TV here, your interview with David Johansen, and like
Wow.
yeah,
I don't think I remember that.
I'll send you a copy. Good. What I really liked about that is, like, it was like David entering his second act after the New York Dolls, and I really kind of appreciated the interview that you gave him, and then like the fact that you mentioned he was there for the first New Year's Eve party. So
Yeah.
that's something that's pretty interesting to me too. Is like bringing along some of the musicians that are maybe on a second act, and kind of providing an opportunity for them.
David Johansen, what a genius. For him, that as a solo artist, great. The New York Dolls really didn't get any play. They didn't have a lot of videos. They didn't get any play on MTV back in the day. But as a solo artist, he got a little play, but it was more that alter ego.
Right.
I'm blanking on the idiot's name.
Poindexter.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
David Johansen. I saw David works at Sirius XM. He still does the David Johansen Mansion of Fun. Great music program, because he is literally an encyclopedic knowledge. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of music. David Johansen said to me in the hallway one time when I bumped into him that Buster Poindexter was the bane of his existence. I mean, he got a big hit out of it, but that's all anybody remembers about David Johansen. Do they remember the Dolls? I mean, some of us do, but a lot of people know Buster Poindexter more, his biggest hit.
But yeah, I guess maybe a younger generation or an in-between generation. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
um, anything?
Trying to think of who else second act wise.
Yeah, that,
Um, who else you might be looking for?
but even like like you said, Paul McCartney, right? I mean, he's
Yeah.
like you know, um,
Well, yeah, I mean, Paul solo, well, it was interesting because obviously the Beatles did videos back in the day. You know, Strawberry Fields was probably one of the first videos I ever saw. Um, so Paul he was totally all about this stuff. He was fine and he embraced it. And, you know, Paul likes mugging for the camera anyway. So it was easy for him to sort of segue into it. I'm trying to think of who else. Well, Kiss, I guess. I mean, Kiss's second act, we did the big unmasking of Kiss. JJ Jackson hosted that, where they took off their makeup and everybody got to see Gene Simmons for the first time. um, that was a big thing, and they did pretty well after that. Obviously, they went back and put their makeup on again a few years later, but that was a pretty cool second act. Cyndi Lauper was one of our early success stories. I was already a fan of Cindy's before MTV. When I first moved to New York, one of the first concerts that I saw was her band Blue Angel. And you know, I didn't know who she was at that point. I didn't even know the band. I stumbled on them by accident. They were opening for somebody else. So I was ready for Cindy when she emerged as a solo artist. And she was everything that was perfect for MTV at that moment. Visually, you know, she was, you know, like in your face, the way that she dressed, you know, the way that she looked on video. And she was a blast. She was joyous. And that just translated. She translated so well. I mean, we were even with her when she segued into that whole wrestling thing. I didn't quite understand that, but you know, that was Cindy. So we were happy about that. And you know, the fact that she progressed from being just, you know, the girls just want to have fun artist to, you know, somebody who can do time after time, you know, those kinds of things, the ballads, and really people began to get the sense of what an incredible talent she was in the long run. Who else? Talking Heads. See, Talking Heads is an interesting band because Talking Heads were really kind of a 70s band, but and it's not like they weren't successful in the 70s, but to see them, and especially the Stop Making Sense film that Jonathan Demme did and the videos from that with David Byrne in the famous big suit, that again, it was just visually arresting. And David Byrne knew that. He had this odd sense already of video. Um, and we played a ton of Talking Heads videos because they were they embraced the video form and were trying to break down walls. Motley Crue was a huge success story that doubled with the rise of Dial MTV because people were literally calling live, and it happened to coincide with the birth of the speed dialer. People were calling and requesting Home Sweet Home. So it was number one on Dial MTV, and we did it every day for like 2 months. So they were another band that absolutely hearing them was one thing, seeing those guys was something else. Video integral to their success, and because of that, ours as well.
Yeah, I
Trying to
mean,
think of who else.
I think you have to say Madonna is an MTV success because, you know, I mean, in the early 80s, she was kind of really a club kid who was on
Right.
the scene in New York and got a record deal and was able to, you know, release that Everybody single. But I think really it was the exposure. I mean, if you agree, the Everybody video was just kind of like a launch pad, and then of course
The one that I remember first was Burning Up.
Ah,
Burning Up was what MTV showed, and that was the single that I remember. I was a fan of hers as soon as I heard Burning Up.
hmm.
That was great. And you know, I didn't do the first interview with Madonna. Alan Hunter did. He interviewed her. I think that they were at I think he interviewed her at the Limelight, where she used to play, you know, before she was Madonna. You know, she was at the Limelight. But I did the second one, which was about a month or so before the release of Like a Virgin,
We
and that's on YouTube. Oh, you have? Do we have that?
in the show as well.
You
Yes.
have that? Okay. So you have me being embarrassed by Madonna, where I asked her about her belt buckle, boy toy,
Yeah.
and I asked her what that meant, and she said, "What do you think it means?" So I just got red and crawled away after that, I think. But Madonna, again, I mean, before before MTV, you know, the idea of something like this aiding an artist's rise was just incomprehensible. And after MTV, it's almost obvious. Right place, right time. She was ready for this. She was ready for video. She knew how to use video. She knew how to strut her stuff. She was all about it. And couple that with incredible drive. She was, you know, she wanted to rule the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so so let's end it with this. It's like you have a great serious radio show these days, which in many ways it looks back on this time period, and I'm wondering if you know there's something that you would like to say that kind of like ties it all together about what you're doing today and how it harkens back to that time and what it all means.
Hmm.
A big statement, but what does it all mean to you? What has it meant to your life?
I could say that working at MTV completely changed my life. Not only because of the professional experience of getting to sit and talk with artists that I admired, whether they were legacy artists or new artists, changed my life. And to get to be a part of something that changed musical history and, in fact, changed this country, changed film, changed television, changed commercials, changed merchandising, changed the music business. To be a part of that was an incredible gift. And the fact that now, all these years later, 41 years later, there's artists who every week new artists are coming up or new songs are coming up from artists that have been around for 5 or 10 years, and I'm finding myself going, this is an 80s song, this is an 80s song, that's an 80s song. There's someone who was influenced by the 80s. The 80s have not left. They are still here, and they're here because there was so much great music that was made in that decade that it refuses to go away. And I, for one, thank you for that.
I think that's perfect.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.